want to begin by showing you a picture. Winter, yes. Actually, it is a winter picture.
Spring.
This was only 7 days before spring, actually.
Winter is so really.
This picture is actually later in the day after this accident happened. There's not a lot you can see. The perspective is low, and you're looking across at the accident. Now, many of you may remember this day, March 13th, 2014, a disaster of history-making proportions. Now, if you were in a car that day, caught in that crash, you might very well have believed that you were part of this little crash with a few semis and a few other cars and that kind of thing, having no idea what actually was going on. But if you had a different perspective, you would see that this crash went on for 2 miles. Everything is different when we can see from a different perspective. When we look back on an event, our eyes are open to things that we couldn't have seen in the midst of the event. It's only by looking back that we can see the whole picture. And this is what we find in the story of Lazarus in John chapter 11. We have a ground level perspective, which is us. It is what we see. That's how we view things from the ground level. Then there's Jesus. He has the divine perspective. He sees things from a different level. In this story, we see Mary and Martha, and they basically play us in this story. They say and do things that we would do in this situation. They see things from a human perspective. We hear from Thomas, doubting Thomas as we call him, and this is one of those cases where he did some doubting. And Thomas is a lot like us. I think this story represented such a major tragedy with the death of Lazarus that it's there to remind us that in the midst of the worst in life, we can't always see the whole picture. And we have no idea what God is going to do, how God is going to move, and what pieces of the puzzle will be put together with divine hands. As we join this account, we find Jesus in the wilderness continuing his ministry. Then there's an emergency. It's an emergency involving a family very near and dear to Jesus, Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. Now a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, "Lord, the one you love is sick." So Lazarus is sick. Now notice that they didn't say, "Lord, could you please come here right now? We need you. Lazarus is sick." They say, "Lord, the one you love is sick." That's not a request. It's not a demand. Why wouldn't it be a request or demand? Because they thought that the second Jesus heard this, he would drop everything and come running back to them right away. You would think Jesus, being close to these people from a human perspective, would have immediately come and joined them to help Lazarus in whatever he was going through. They knew that he healed people. They knew that he did miracles. So of course he's going to come running. So they didn't need to request. They didn't need to ask. They didn't need to demand. They knew Jesus was going to come. But when Jesus heard this, he said, "The sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it." Now this is a hint. This is a hint that something amazing is going to happen. But already we see Jesus looking at this from a different perspective. Because they hear this and they think one thing when Jesus means something entirely different. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. This, from our human perspective, is unbelievable. Why would Jesus stay where he was for 2 more days knowing this? Our human perspective says, "Seriously, Jesus? Seriously? Your work is more important than your best friend Lazarus, this one whom you love?" But strangely, he is staying because he loves Martha, her sister, and Lazarus. The word love used here is actually the word agape. It is the highest kind of love. It is the love of God. But it makes no sense from a human perspective. Why would he stay there if he loved more? You would think if he loved more, he'd be coming running back. It was because he wanted to teach them something divine, something bigger, something greater. And by doing that, he was demonstrating his love to them. And then he said to his disciples, let's go back to Judea. But Rabbi, they said, a short while ago, the Jews there tried to stone you, and yet you want to go back? Jesus answered, are there not 12 hours of daylight? Anyone who walks in the daytime will not stumble, for they see by this world's light. What's truly amazing about this little section here is that they just expected Jesus to drop everything and go, but the second he says he's going to go, they say, why are we going to go? I mean, they're bouncing from one end to the other, just like we do. That's how we respond. That's how we act. From our perspective, that's exactly what we would do. Well, now that we're actually going to go, I'm not so sure this is a good idea. It is when a person walks at night that they stumble, for they have no light. Jesus, again, divine perspective. He's looking at the big picture, not the small picture they can see. After he had said this, he went on to tell them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I'm going there to wake him up. His disciples replied, Lord, if he sleeps, he will get better. Jesus had been speaking of his death, but his disciples thought he meant natural sleep. Again, the disciples saw it from the human perspective. They heard the word sleep, and they thought, well, he's just sleeping. He's sick. He's going to get better. Whereas Jesus was saying, no, he's really dead. He's really going to be dead. But I see things from a different perspective, from a heavenly perspective. So then he told them plainly, Lazarus is dead. Okay, you can't get more plain than that. He is dead. That's all there is to it, because they weren't understanding. Sleep not meaning the same thing that Jesus was meaning. Lazarus is dead. And for your sake, I'm glad I was not there, so you may believe. Again, here he's answering the question. If I deeply love you, I want to show you something that will make you believe that I am who I say I am. If we went and he was still sick, it would just be another miracle. But if he's actually dead, something bigger is going to happen. But let us go to him. Then Thomas, doubting Thomas, also known as Didymus, said to the rest of the disciples, let us also go, that we may die with him. Now Thomas, wonderful Thomas here, is being sarcastic in my opinion, being extremely sarcastic. Remember, they just said if they go back to Judea, exactly where he was the Jews were trying to stone Jesus in the first place, that they were going to die. So basically, what Thomas is saying here is, yeah guys, let's go back, so when they kill Jesus, he can kill us all too. We'll all be dead together. So Thomas, doubting Thomas, is showing his true colors. He is showing a human perspective. So then they head that direction. On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. I don't think it was said that way. I think it was said, Jesus, if you had been here, he wouldn't have died. Yeah, I mean, she exactly. She was so upset. But what's funny is what happens next, because she's extremely upset here. No question. There's bitterness. There's anger. They sent this message ahead of time. Jesus should have known, and they expected him to show up, and he didn't. Suddenly she realizes who she's talking to. But I know that even now, God will do whatever you ask. I love that. I mean, immediately and again, human perspective. But suddenly, for a moment, she thinks of the God perspective. I know that God can do whatever you ask. Flipping from one side to the other. Doesn't that describe us as humans? Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha answered, I know he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. Again, she's thinking from a human perspective because it's not occurring to her that this could happen right now. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die, and whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? Yes, Lord, she replied. I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who is to come into the world. I believe to her those were just words. I actually don't know if in her heart she truly, truly believed it. I think she was saying that because that's what Jesus wanted to hear. But did she really believe it in her heart? Did that totally encompass her belief structure? I'm not so sure. After she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. "The teacher is here," she said, "and he is asking for you." When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. So now we have Mary's turn. So Mary went to where he was. And remember, he hadn't gotten to the house yet. He hadn't gotten there. He was still on the outskirts of the city. Martha had gone out there. Now Mary is out there with him. Now Jesus had not entered the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who had been with Mary in the house, comforting her, noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her. Remember, it said, sort of whispered in her ear. And so she leaves and like, well, she's leaving quickly. Let's find out what's going on. They quickly went out. They followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to mourn there. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, "Lord, if you had been there, my brother would not have died." Same thing. Same as Martha. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her were also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. "Where have you laid him?" he asked. "Come and see, Lord," they replied. I want to go back to this verse here. Deeply moved. The ancient Greek actually has a description for where that came from. The ancient Greek word it comes from is from a horse snorting. And a lot of commentators believe that Jesus actually gasped when he saw how emotionally this affected everybody there. To me, this tells me that Jesus is who he said he was. Not only was he was God, but he was man. Because even though he knew from a divine perspective that he could solve the situation, from a human perspective, he understands our emotions. When we are down as low can be, Jesus understands. He gasped. He was so shocked at seeing these people and how it affected them. In the shortest verse in the entire Bible, Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, "See how he loved him. See how Jesus loved Lazarus." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" So in the midst of this, what do we go back to? The human perspective. Right back again. In the days of Jesus, a tomb typically held 8 bodies. It was a hollowed out area, usually in a hillside or possibly in a cave. Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. "Take away the stone," he said. "But Lord," said Martha, the sister of the dead man, "by this time there is a bad odor, for he has been in there 4 days." You say, well, why would they mention that? I think there's a couple of reasons. Number one, Martha and Mary were fully aware that Lazarus was dead, was actually really dead. Did they really have to go through the pain of smelling the stench of decaying and dead bodies by opening up the tomb? Did they really have to go through that? And then I think for us, that's written there for a reason as well, to again say to us, he was really, really dead. This is another proof that he wasn't just sleeping. The smell was another way to say, yes, Lazarus was truly dead, and it made what happened next all the more miraculous. Then Jesus said, "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, so that they may believe that you sent me." Now think about that again. So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up. "Father, I thank you that you have heard me." Jesus wasn't saying that for himself. He actually wasn't necessarily saying it to God. He was saying it to all the people around, because he knew that they were probably questioning what exactly is going to happen here. And that's why he explains himself. And he says, well, I know you always hear me, but I'm saying it for the benefit of these people that were standing here. When he had said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, "Lazarus," and I learned it in Sunday school, "come forth." The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. Jesus said to them, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." Perspective. When Jesus calls us to follow him, he's asking us to step out of the grave and into a new life. And part of that new life is a new understanding and a new perspective. With Jesus, everything is possible. He calls us to put our lives in his hands. Perspective means that we're willing to trust Him when everything seems lost. In those moments, God wants us to turn to Him and find comfort in His arms. A divine perspective reminds us that in the midst of tragedy, Jesus knows and feels our sorrows. Right now we have tragedies all around us. Tragedies happening every day. We see death. We see all of these things happening. But know that Jesus feels our sorrow. Jesus feels our pain. He deeply loves us. He gasps when He hears our cries. Revelation 21 verse 4, He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. The question is, where is our perspective? He's calling all of us to come out of the grave and be different people. He calls us to live a new life. He calls us to live an abundant life.